Alan, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Really looking forward to this. I don't really think I need to do much of an introduction. I think everybody knows Alan and everybody knows NCZ. But tell us about the good work and the story of how NCZ came about.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind to be fair, but I think it started right back in 2006. So as I'm sure most people can probably imagine, that was a tough sell back then when you're knocking on people's doors to talk to them about their carbon footprint, and you just get a blank face and why do I need to do that? But now it's literally, I mean, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, it's the absolute opposite. You know, people are really feeling that expectation to be able to understand and be able to communicate on what the impact of what they do is. And there's a number of different reasons behind that. But essentially, our role is to help organisations to not only know what their footprint is, but understand it and understand where it's coming from, so that ultimately they can have a much more targeted and appropriate and ultimately more successful journey to net zero. And that comes from calculating their footprint and having that full insight into what they should be spending their time and effort and resources on to make that change.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's get this one out of the way, because we talk about net zero, we talk about the greenhouse effect and all these different words, and some people are on board, some people don't get it, some people just don't care, which is obviously a worry. But what's the biggest misconception?
That's a good question. I think, to be honest, for me, I think the biggest misconception is that net zero is a tick box exercise. It's something that you announce with a date and a vague plan, and the reality is it's so much more than that. There's so much that needs to happen. It's an ongoing process. It's something that requires quality data. It requires engagement with your entire operational and supply chain and value chain, and it means that it requires a successful implementation of the appropriate measures for a business of that type. So there is no one size fits all. There is no silver bullet that fixes it all. There's so many businesses out there that think, well, maybe just transitioning to renewable energy and transitioning my fleet to EV vehicles will get me there. The reality is those are fantastic things to do, but that's only a very small portion of the overall requirement. And the most important thing, I think, is understanding what can and can't be done right now, and then actually having a plan and being able to then demonstrate that you're aware of your limitations, not trying to hide them. This is something that we understand, and I use this analogy a lot, but it's pointless me turning around to the airline industry and saying, look, the answer to all your problems is just fly less. Or a haulage company saying, do fewer deliveries. I mean, that's the end of that conversation immediately. The reality is it's not about restricting business. It's not about stopping people from doing something. It's just about doing it as efficiently as you possibly can, and understanding what steps can be taken to maximise that efficiency.
Yeah, definitely. So we talk about that data, and we've got the ambition. Yeah. So how do we turn ambition into measurable?
It's about making it tangible. It's about understanding that this is where we are now. So if you have a credible baseline, a full understanding of exactly what your footprint is and where it's coming from and what can and can't be done about it, that's when you can take a strategic approach to prioritizing that journey. And being able to then track that and understand and communicate on the steps that you have taken and the success that's brought. Being clear and transparent about the challenges and the areas that you've not been able to influence, and making sure that you're going about this in a very, very much a best practice approach, so that it isn't ever seen as just trying to look good. It's we're genuinely doing what we can do, and this is the plan for the things that we can't do anything about.
Yeah. Do you believe that the data and the technology together can help businesses get there faster?
Yeah, it's the catalyst, really. It's being able to. I mean, the more granular your data is, the more successful the steps that you are going to take to decarbonize will become, because it's only really until you understand exactly what that footprint is and where it's coming from that you can genuinely do anything about it, or at least set targets that are meaningful and and appropriate for that business. There's so many businesses that I've seen that have made statements to say that we're going to be net zero by 2028, and it's difficult to sort of see that and think, oh, really, without thinking you're probably not going to get there, or at least if you're going to get there, let's be clear about what the claim is, because the reality is most businesses out there, not all, but the vast majority, are sitting there with 60, 70, 80, maybe even 90% of their footprint is completely outside of their control.
Yeah.
So if you can make the changes that you can make, but you're only able to influence 10 or maybe 20% of your overall footprint, that's a problem. That's literally stopping you getting to net zero.
Yeah.
And it's not until you can engage with that wider aspect of your footprint, the inaccessible element of your footprint traditionally, that you can then start to affect change and influence what can and can't be done. And that's why we're seeing so much of an increase in the questions that are being asked now.
Yeah.
So businesses are now being asked questions they never were before.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's mainly because those businesses asking the questions are sitting there looking at their footprint, say, well, hang on, 80% of my footprint's outside of my control. How am I going to hit my reduction targets or get anywhere near net zero unless my supplier helps me? So it has to be a collaborative approach. It's genuinely not going to happen in isolation. It has to incorporate everyone. And then in order to do that successfully, you need the technology. You need to be able to scale it. You need to make it accessible and easy for people to do, because the easier it becomes, the more likely they are to adopt those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, if you've got that technology to give you that data, to be able to say where you are, then you have something to be able to measure.
You can quantify it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I was with a potential new client earlier in the week. They're a multinational, international £1 billion turnover company. We presented an FM solution, TFM solution to them. We got to part of our presentation that was about sustainability and net zero. It came up on the screen and the client said, "Move on."
Wow.
Yeah. That's a worry.
It is a worry, because I mean, it's happening, thankfully, less now, but there has always been, and traditionally it's always been the case, that sustainability or the future of a business is about how much money are we making. And the reality is, if you're making lots of money but you're doing that in an environmentally or socially unacceptable way, you're not going to be making that same amount of money for much longer, because people won't want to buy from you, people won't want to work for you, and indeed anyone on a supply chain compliance program isn't going to be able to buy from you, because they have to understand the impact of the decisions that they make when they buy something.
Yep.
If I buy from you, is that helping or hindering my journey to net zero? And that's a very real question to ask, because unless I understand that, how can I make that procurement decision when I know I've got to get to where I need to get to? Yeah. And if 80% is in my supply chain, that's a huge issue.
Yeah.
So the companies, I think, that are saying move on and not taking that seriously will find that they've got a significant issue that will have to be addressed. It's coming across everything that we do in terms of our businesses and our lives and how we run, but it's now hitting people in the pocket.
Yeah.
So decisions are being made, investment decisions are made. When someone buys a company, they're doing their risk assessment. Well, not having sustainability policies or an ESG plan in place is a risk, because I need to now implement that for that company to be sustainable and successful long term.
Yeah.
So that's going to cost me. What am I going to find? Is it in place? How difficult is that going to be? So again, it's a risk. So people are now adopting it just to make sure that they get ahead of that, so that if someone's looking at their business, they have something of value. And it's businesses that are genuinely integrating sustainability into how they operate, making it part of the fabric of their business and the value that they add. That is going to put them worlds apart from competitors, because if I'm providing you with a service and I know that I'm part of your footprint, and the challenge you have is that you don't understand where that footprint comes from. If I'm telling you where that footprint comes from, and I'm telling you in a credible way, in a way that gives you insight, and particularly if I'm managing those emissions and I'm doing that for you, that's incredibly attractive to buy from, because that's a whole thing that customer now doesn't have to do simply by buying from you.
Yeah, and you're right, because they're, end of the day, they're in a line of supply chain. Yeah, so they ship product and fly products throughout the world.
Right.
And most of it goes into the retail space. So that retail spaces will be doing what we're talking about, and they become part of that supply chain.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do we get our supply chain engaged, and how do we get them into the conversation?
It's a really important aspect to any credible net zero journey, because if so much of the footprint is in the supply chain, we're not going to get anywhere near where we need to get to unless we engage. So, but in order to engage, you need to be able to facilitate the ability for your suppliers to give you the information that you need from them. You know, we've in the early days, you know, when we were talking to customers who were saying, "Oh, we're trying to get our information from our supply partners." And you know, you can send out an email and ask all your suppliers to provide you with carbon information, and just watch the tumbleweed. And 90% of those suppliers are just going to ignore the email. And then, if you're lucky, 10% might
it's the
respond.
Mr. Bean moment, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Not, maybe 10% might respond, and some of those will give you, well, we've done this, or some of them will give you this certificate, or we did some of these like social days and all these amazing things that they've done. But there's no consistent approach. There's no continuity. How do you even start to work with that?
Yeah.
So what tends to happen is we need to understand what the impact is overall. So you have to apply a spend-based metric to understand what your supply chain footprint looks like as an overview.
Yeah.
That gives you a working metric, a consistent approach. You can now say, okay, we now know with the best methodology in place, we know what that footprint is very, very likely to be. That's your starting point. But you can't rely on spend-based metric for more than 1 or 2 years, because your carbon reduction plan of your biggest element of your carbon footprint can't just be, oh, we'll spend less. Because if your business is growing, actually you're going to spend more. So it's going to go immediately in the wrong direction. So we need to understand the specifics. We need to be able to isolate what that looks like supplier by supplier. And again, you have to make it easy as possible. We have to remove every single barrier to entry. We have a program that engages with suppliers so that any type of supplier anywhere on their journey can engage, even if they're already doing it and they're very mature on their journey, or they don't want to spend any money, they just literally want to tick a box to try and keep you off their back. Or you want people who want to start but have never done it before and need the support. So there will be all sorts of different types of businesses. You have to enable all of them to provide you with the information, and do it in a way that actually benefits them.
Yeah.
If you're asking them to do something, it's just another thing that I've got to do as a supplier. If you ask them to do something that's genuinely beneficial for their business, not just for you, but for literally anyone that starts asking them questions, suddenly that's of value, and they're going to be much more inclined to want to do that. So again, it's making it as easy as possible and provide it in a way that enables suppliers to easily engage with you and give you the information that you need from them.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So where do those guys who are listening today, where do they start? How do they get going? How do they get certified? How do they set targets?
Yeah.
What's the stages? Where do they need to start? And where do they go?
So the most important aspect is the initial understanding. It's setting a baseline. So if people are looking at what to do, if we were talking to a brand new client, it would be the first thing is set that baseline and genuinely understand what your footprint actually is and where it's coming from. Because some of that will surprise a lot of customers. They might think, oh, it's our vehicles, or it's our energy. And they'll be quite surprised as to probably what those emissions drivers actually are. So setting that baseline in place, but doing that in a way that adds value. So doing it in a way that's very compliant, it future-proofs the business so that should they decide to do anything further on from that point, they have at least got that credible starting point and that quality of carbon reporting in place to enable them to do anything that they then decide to do moving forward. But ultimately, that baseline will be the basis of whatever they decide to do with regards to their journey to net zero. So that will constantly get referred to year after year. So if your baseline's here and you're trying to get to here, how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
So understanding what can and can't be influenced, to what degree can it be influenced? Can we look at our vehicle fleet? Can we change that? If so, when? And therefore, when you start to get that level of detail, it's only then that you can actually start to set any meaningful target, because otherwise you're sort of saying, well, we're gonna aim to be 30% more efficient within the next 5 years. And if that's a statement that's being made without understanding whether that's even possible, it's literally you're pushing a problem potentially 5 years down the road that is probably potentially going to catch you out. So it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be honest. If you've got credible information and you're being transparent about what you do, then you're accountable. It's okay to have to amend the plan because things change, technology changes. We speak to distributors who want to transition their fleet to EV vehicles, but actually they've done an analysis. The vehicles available right now aren't fit for purpose for them. So, they need extra weight requirements or, range issues. Infrastructure might not be available yet. So that's not something that they can do, yet they want to. So they need to be aware and be able to communicate that is the impact of our fleet of vehicles.
No, I get that.
These are the challenges that we have. This is what we're going to do about it when we can. But in the meantime, we're going to focus on this, and this area, which is going to result in a 20% reduction in this area and this area, which is a 7% reduction in our total carbon footprint. Suddenly, that's very clear. That's very credible, and it's positive, and it's true.
Yeah. I think a lot of the problem is people are not being true to themselves, maybe. And we talk about low-hanging fruit all the time. But it's looking at, the areas where actually it's credible, it can be achievable. And I think sometimes that's just being true to yourself.
Absolutely.
You're not always going to, be able to hit the bigger fish. Because it's just not achievable. But you shouldn't be embarrassed by it. It's just part of that journey.
It's better to say that we're aware of what we can't do. Because then it's not something that you haven't even addressed. It's something that you've looked at, you've assessed. There are restrictions or limitations on being able to do that right now. We've documented that. This is what we can do, and then when we can, get to that section, then we will. So it's more important to really have a framework in place.
So this is more of a personal opinion, because we don't still know. Yes, we're seeing some industries are being fined, taxed, all these kind of things. I was at the International Shipping Conference in Bilbao a few weeks ago. They know that if they don't hit their targets by 2030, their tariffs will be much larger for shipping of goods. And if they do hit them, they will have more of a reasonable. So that creates competitiveness with consequences if they're not hitting them targets. Where do you see this all going? Will it be a taxable facility for the government, for local councils? Where do you think it will go?
It's a great question, and it's so difficult to answer because the vast majority of what's happening, certainly within the voluntary sector, is very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all approach. Legislation has crept in and has expanded. CRC came out and it was capturing something like 4,000 companies, and now we've got SECR and ESOS, and there's something like 16,000 companies reporting, and that's only growing. But it's still only capturing companies of a certain size, certain sector, and so on. I think what's moving the market more is that expectation from businesses who have basically understood now that the challenge for them is getting to where they need to get to when so much of it is outside of their control. And I think that's going to drive change faster than legislation. But I think as an overview, from a global perspective, we're currently running at an intensity rate more than 3 times the level that it needs to be. And the closer we get to target years like 2030, the more pressure that's going to be applied, because it will start to be very, very clear that we're not where we need to be. And there's some fantastic things that are happening, really exciting things that are happening. But if the rate at which we're making change hasn't got to where it needs to get to, then the pressure will increase.
Yeah,
I don't know whether that will be in taxes or any sort of governmental push. I think that possibly will come again, probably closer to target years. But I think there will be different processes in place that will capture elements. So as you mentioned, when you're importing or exporting particular materials, for instance, that's now being tracked, and that's going to have to be reported on a quarterly basis, and that's going to be reflected in pricing. So that sort of thing is actually already starting to happen, and I think I think that pressure is probably going to come from the businesses themselves, understanding that there's a real challenge, and unless they get engagement, then if you've absolutely eradicated your scope 1 and 2 emissions because of all the steps that you can take, and they're the elements of your footprint that you can control, and then all of the rest of your footprint isn't falling in line, then the pressure's just going to increase, because that is the stumbling block. That is the point that is stopping us getting to where we need to get to.
Yeah, no. It's interesting because there is still a lot of we don't know. We don't know. We're putting all this effort in, and we're seeing the results, which is absolutely fantastic. We are seeing companies who aren't engaging, which we talk about technology, we talk about AI. The people who are not adopting and adapting are going to get left behind. This is one of them that if businesses do not take this on and don't adapt and don't adopt, they will get left behind.
Oh, 100%. I mean, if you've ever got time on your hands, read the Global Risks Report, and 4 of the top 5 risks that we face over the next decade are all climate change related.
Yeah.
So it's such an overarching, widespreading issue that affects literally everyone. And it's clear to see that the businesses that are providing some of the solutions. So just in that example that I gave, when businesses are saying, well, hang on a minute, how am I going to get to net zero if 80% is in my supply chain? I don't control that. So if you're in that situation, you're looking for innovation, you're looking at where carbon reduction is going to come from, because you can only control 10 or 20%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the businesses that are saying, actually, our product or our service can reduce your carbon footprint, well, I'm naturally going to be, at some point, I'm going to need to buy from that supplier, because that's going to help me get to where I need to get to, because they can help me do that, I can't.
Yeah.
So it's naturally going to evolve in that way. So the businesses that are driving efficiencies, making changes, we've seen the turnstiles in the train stations of Paris are now generating enough power just by walking in and out of that turnstile to power something like 60,000 homes in that area. What a fantastic innovation that can be retrofitted into the existing infrastructure.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're going to generate power. It's not that we want to stop using power. We need power,
but
we just want to do that in a way that's not damaging the environment.
Yeah.
I did an article recently on the materials being used to build our buildings. The bricks and the concrete is actually it's understanding how nature through photosynthesis creates power. I mean, it's literally tracking the temperature change and using that fluctuation in temperature to self-generate power. So we're going to be in a position where buildings will power themselves and don't even need to be connected to the grid.
Yeah.
It's just, there's so many exciting things. So it's not about stopping people doing what they need to do. It's about just doing it and changing the way we do that so it can be more efficient. Yeah. Businesses need to decouple carbon emissions from economic growth, become as successful as possible, make as much money as possible, because that's also adding to your sustainability journey. Yeah. But let's just do that in a way that has the lowest possible impact.
Yeah, definitely. And when you see the likes of insurance companies and banks taking interest in people's journey of net zero, that shit's got real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know
Yeah.
it. You
And
know
has
it
to.
has. You know because we're talking to some of our partner insurers who refer work in, and a couple of sustainable banks that refer work in, and they're saying that they expect when they're lending money or they're insuring properties, there's a journey in place. There's something there.
I think it's mainly because I think people now understand that there's a very big difference between the price of something and the cost of it. So when you buy something, you can see what the price is because it's there on the bill in black and white. But what's the actual cost of doing business? When I buy that product or I commission that service, how does that reflect on me?
Yeah.
Is that something I want to do when I know the bigger picture, or perhaps maybe do I want to rethink that decision? So we're in that world now. It's not just race to the bottom in terms of price. And admittedly, it still is in some tenders and some relationships. But that can't last forever. If you're making a procurement decision because you can save a few pennies on a particular product, is that actually long term the right thing for me to do? Because I might save some pennies per unit now, but is that saving that I'm going to make the same or possibly nowhere near the level of benefit that I'm going to give my business by maybe going with a supplier that can actually give me the information that I need and reduce my footprint by buying from them? So that reduction alone might far outweigh the saving that you've just made on that few pennies on that product. And it's those kind of conversations and decisions that are being made now, because we can't just think like we used to and just look at the price of something. It's about how does that reflect, and is that the right procurement decision for me to make?
Yeah, absolutely. And as well, and we've seen this recently, with the changes in the EPC. Ben did a video that was shared on LinkedIn just a few weeks ago. And when you're seeing that the EPC rules are changing, which means that landlords are not going to be able to let buildings out, and agents are not going to be able to sell if they don't achieve certain EPC ratings. So it's not something that's going to go away, and it's something that could have a huge financial impact on businesses if they don't make a start. So hopefully everything we've discussed has been a help to people. One of the things that I want to get across is that it sounds very complicated, and I think you probably could add to this. And as a business who has started the journey, yes, there's hurdles, and supply chain is one of the pains of the process, but actually the actual mechanism is actually really simple. And I think the thought of it puts a lot of people off.
You're absolutely right, and the education piece is incredibly important. I mean, thank you for having me on the podcast today, because we want to ensure that people don't get overwhelmed. It can seem very complicated and a mammoth task that perhaps people don't necessarily know the right approach to have. And it's the best piece of advice is don't strive for perfection right now. Let's just start on the elements that we can control, and look at that, make that start, and just put yourself in a position where you can put one foot in front of the other and follow a strategic approach to getting to where you need to get to. It absolutely won't happen overnight, and it does need to be broken down into sections. But don't overcomplicate it. Look at what's possible, and focus on that, and then start to delve deeper, when that's appropriate, and start to make changes that are going to drive the kind of changes that we need to see. But I suppose one thing I always like to make clear is that if you're taking these steps, these aren't just steps to be taken to sort of try and look a certain way and use it as a marketing opportunity, or just to comply with the requirements that are coming your way from customers. If you're going to do this in a way that is genuinely going to drive value for you, and indeed anyone that's buying from you. And if you're providing that and making it part of how you operate, then it's ultimately going to be so much more successful. If those decisions are being made across the board, and the fact that you're taking the steps that you're taking means that anyone that buys from you is benefiting from the steps that you've taken, suddenly that's infinitely more successful for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And that's going to drive success and help you to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, no. Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate you coming and joining us today.
Thanks, Mike.
But no, thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Excellent.